Well, there are many existing standards bodies that are focused on the technical specification of next generation broadband. But the WBBA has been created to focus on the business, financial, and the regulatory challenges of creating a viable next generation broadband industry over the coming 10 to 15 years.
Today, broadband networks and the services that ride atop are, to many, deemed critical national infrastructure, essential to our modern digital lives in all of its forms. Yet, as an industry, we are somewhat overlooked, few noticing the wonders of the physics and many taking for granted the service until it's no longer there. The World Broadband Association has agreed a shared vision, ultra broadband for all, as a key enabler for a more equitable, sustainable future.
We're working with the World Broadband Association to try and get the high-speed, low-latency connectivity to suburban and rural communities. Many parts of the world focused on getting broadband connectivity to metro and metropolitan areas, and we believe that this high-speed, low-latency connectivity is required in the more rural areas to try and get the digital transformation so badly needed for these businesses.
For most of us, 2022 has been a year of change. Post-pandemic social and economic recovery has picked up steam over the past year, and we are learning how to both survive and thrive in this new normal. This year has also been a year of growth for the WBBA. We have overhauled our organizational structure, and more members from around the world, including telecom operators, vendors, investors, are now on board, truly making the WBBA an increasingly important platform for international collaboration within the broadband industry.
All countries, therefore, regardless of their broadband legacy, should aim to develop a network that meets the World Broadband Association's vision of ultra-high-speed connectivity for all, a converged network that will help accelerate monetization, an agile network that enables new business models, full automation to maximize network and operations optimization, and a network that is fully secure and has minimal impact on the environment.
WBBA is an international platform focusing on the development of the cloud, broadband, and committed to promoting broadband industry cooperation. China Telecom will be more than glad to share our experiences in cloud broadband with global industrial chain partners, jointly build a new cloud network convergence infrastructure, connect the world, and enable the digital transformation forward a prosperous future.
We've gone from kilobits per second to megabits per second. We're now in the gigabit era. It's quite amazing what we're achieving, and broadband is actually changing people's lives. So the single most important thing that the World Broadband Association has to do over the next couple of years is to create that same sense of excitement with people everywhere about broadband, to influence policymakers, regulators, investors, that broadband is something that everybody needs and that we need to invest in.
Chorus joined the WBBA because we believe that it will help identify and drive share goals across the broadband industry. We know that as a collective, we can learn from each other, grow, and adapt to the future trends in our dynamic industry. In a short period of time, the WBBA has already released several white papers and is running global workshops looking at the various opportunities and the challenges ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody, Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the afternoon session of today's World Broadband Association Annual Event 2022. Just by way of reintroduction, my name is Mark Oliver. I'm Senior Consulting Director at Omdia, which is the research and consulting arm of Informa Tech. I'm delighted to be both the host of the event here today, but also a member of the World Broadband Association since its inception last year. Just to recap on some of the key headlines, some of the key things that we took away from the morning session. We had Eric Verstraetz from the FTTH Council of Europe talking to us about the need to invest in future-proof networks. And we had a panel discussion which looked at the consumer demands in particular of the future that are going to really make that important investment around future-proofing the network. He also talked about the importance of balance between public and private investment. We then had Marcus from Huawei and Stefan van Hastel from Nokia talking to us about the World Broadband Association's work in defining and developing a next generation technology roadmap for broadband, and importantly, designing that roadmap from a starting point of, firstly, it's not just about speed, but secondly, from a position and a perspective of the user experience rather than being technology driven in the first instance. Coming up this afternoon, later today, we're going to be hearing a little bit more about the most innovative use cases that are being developed and delivered across the world right now. But first of all, when the World Broadband Association broke into its working groups in May of this year, those were determined by what our members decided were some of the most important topics facing the industry today and the areas that we needed to address as an association. As you can imagine, sustainability and the green agenda came out very clearly towards the top of that, and a working group was convened. What we're going to be hearing about over the course of the following keynotes and the panel discussion is around the importance of environmental sustainability, both in technology and operator strategies. Throughout the course of the next hour and a half, we're going to be hearing from Trevor Linney, Network Technology Director from Openreach, Martin Kriener, our Director General of the WBBA, Vincent Garnier, Director General of the FTTH Council Europe, JB Russello, CEO of Chorus. But first of all, I'd like to welcome onto the stage Chairman of ISG F5G at ETSI, Luca Pesando.
So, hello everyone. Thank you for being here and for the opportunity to share some views about the topic that is the focus of this session, which is how to manage to use our networks to improve the sustainability of our lives, of our society, and can we improve our networks without impacting that too much? Are networks and communications a mean to improve life or a risk for it to become not sustainable? So the presentation will be structured along those lines, and starting from where the problems are with communications and communications networks and sustainability, and what the interwork between the two aspects of development and the need to make the networks, but also the world, a better place and a more sustainable one. And also, I will try to analyze the different views on this, around this, and there are many. It is a bit difficult to structure a message. Indeed, you could diverge very easily. There are aspects that come in and you just touch upon. So bear with me if you will feel that I was not exhaustive on any of the topics that I will touch upon, but that's just because my final aim is that I would like to spend some positive words with regard to what we can do for sustainability, even if we work on something that is apparently not totally related. It is communication. What is that? It is networks. It is technology. And so I will try to finalize my presentation, getting to some, to me, important points that I would like to share with you. Starting, so what can we do? We should develop communication infrastructures, and we have to care about about what the energy impact, the environmental impact of our work is. So the fact is that we are deploying networks because we have several needs, and we want those to be there because that's our business. So we want networks to deliver better services. We want to encourage people to focus, register, consume those services. And we have a push coming from the facts that we don't control, like the pandemic situation, about some bad events like wars that come in, and how do we face those problems that also have side effects, like an energy crisis that is ongoing now, and especially in Europe, we know about it. So can networks be used to improve those many aspects that seem to be critical for the development of the network themselves? So definitely we need to work at reducing the amount of energy that we need to use to operate our networks, to deploy them, to deliver the services that we want to deliver to our customers. I'm speaking here as a representative of a telecom operator as Telecom Italia team. So we have very much in our mind that we need to reduce that. And by the way, the efforts made by my company are absolutely giving good results. And but we have to work further because there are aspects that are not totally under control. But so what kind of networks? That's another debate. We speak a lot about mobile. We focus on mobile. Services are now targeting specifically and very much mobile. But we have to bear in mind that mobile networks should be possibly a solution that is used when they are really needed, and we don't have to forget about the fixed networks. The broadband fixed networks still have something to do, and we have not to forget that they have to evolve in a ecologically compatible way as well. They start with a very good positioning, let's say, because the fixed network require much less energy. The services delivered through a fixed network are less energy consuming. And so that's another thing we should bear in mind, that they offer some solutions. So I found this very good analysis that is applying to mobile networks in particular, but it holds for all sorts of communications. And it gives an idea of how much margin for improvement we have, as when you break down the energy consumption that you need to deliver your services, you discover that after some calculations, only 15-16% of the energy you require to the source is used to really move the information. All the rest is around it. So can we make, this is the source, by the way, is always mentioned. This is a work coming from Nokia. This is something that we have to bear in mind. We have a lot of stages in the usage of this energy that we require from the networks that can be improved. So we can focus on what the bit needs to be moved, but also on everything is around that. Therefore, we can definitely try to to understand better the problem, but because we have to implement something that will allow to focus on the right part of the problems in what we could say it is a vicious loop where everything pushes towards an increase in the energy demand and consumption, while we should not forget that there are aspects, if we work on those aspects, we manage to change direction and to head towards something that is more viable, that also allows increasing the efficiency and the sustainability of other activities, not directly that of communication. So, in fact, this is something that we have to push for, trying to focus on what we can deliver first and better to increase this virtuous circle that decreases the demand for energy and for communications, but also for the activities that benefit of communications. So there are new technologies that are emerging that are indeed useful in that regard. So machine-to-machine is something that is very much used to control energy consumption, to require less energy to do our activities, and that's something we need to indeed to try to develop in the most viable way. We have application of artificial intelligence that is very useful in trying to operate networks in a way that we reduce dramatically the consumption of energy. And we can find, again, please, if I don't mention, you can anyway find references to sources that I use for this, and you find around a lot of indications that we can head towards something that is becoming an advantage that will push towards better conditions. So we also need to spend something to enable our customers to improve their energy efficiency and not only look at the network itself. So one of the drivers is for sure initiatives in the initiatives that are taken at different levels. I mentioned here one that is the Agenda 2030 by the ONU, something that probably everyone knows very well. In that, for example, making access to energy easy and viable is one thing where communication, telecommunications can help quite a lot, as I just said. So again, we should take a look at the positive effects of implementing telecommunications and remember that it is very much convenient to many areas of the industry. And so, for example, communications are fundamental for the operators that produce and deliver energy to every single user, because smart grids also aim at reducing better than reducing, they aim at increasing the efficiency in the production and delivery of energy. And that's where communications become essential. So what we also have to care about is something that is always left outside the picture, and that's something we need not to forget about, and we need to increase the effort in considering that and improving that side. That is the production of something that is e-waste in the sense that is tools that are changed too frequently, consumption of materials that could be avoided. We need to make things that last longer, that can be recycled more easily, and that's something that operators can also be effective on, because, for example, we are one of the keys to the market for companies that build devices. We sell devices for communication, the phones, whatever, to our customers, and in that we have to push for an improvement in the energy efficiency. There is a very, very interesting work done by the ARCEP, that is a French public organization that analyzes the production of the effects produced by the communication industry on the energy consumption, and how communications can be made viable, reducing and more accessible to everyone, reducing their own energy consumption, but also allowing to reduce the energy demand from other areas of the industry. And so how to achieve both? For me, the questions that are shown on your right are the fundamental questions. And one is how we can achieve both connectivity, deliver services with an increase, a better sustainability, and maintaining that sustainability at least, but also improving it. And the other point is how to, we have to maintain both the digital evolution and the user freedom in accessing it without making the energy point something that will spoil this game and this increase in our society. Networks can do that. So what kind of networks? For sure, mobile delivers a lot of very valuable things to the users, and nobody would ever dream to say, no mobile anymore, or something like that. Anyway, let's not forget that there is still a big margin for what fixed networks can do, and fixed networks consume something that is much, much less than the mobile. It is in the order of 20, 30 times less. The energy per bit required to move information around. Nevertheless, we need to improve penetration, reach for our fixed networks, because that's the disadvantage in many cases of fixed networks with respect to the mobile, that can reach you everywhere at some cost. So I don't dream to say anything against the penetration of 5G services on mobile, etc. Let's not forget that many things can be done better on the fixed network with just some effort to improve it. The 81% of total the greenhouse gas emissions come from the technologies, and we can really concentrate on that to try to reduce it. So I come to my conclusions, trying to remark that yes, the mobile is great, but we have not to forget about the fact that fixed networks, first of all, are essential in the support of mobile networks. So if we improve the energy profile, let's say, of fixed services, we also improve that of mobile services. If we work at the reachability, the fact that the flexibility in delivering services over fixed networks, we will do something even better and make users require less mobile devices, services, antennas, and power, simply because there is a better solution, an easier solution. This is my last slide, and I spent some words about the efforts made in this direction, of making fixed networks something better and improving their capability to provide services at a lower energy cost. These efforts are done in several organizations, starting from a definition of a standard. While there is one big organization that does everything for the mobile side, it's not the same for the fixed network. We have several groups, all of them do important things, and everyone is putting some effort in trying to make these separate efforts at different tables converge and deliver something better, faster, and more efficiently. So personally, I'm representing ETSI, and I'm working inside ETSI for that. But we try to talk and to work with other organizations to make things better and coherently, not to have several things that won't match one with the other, which is another way to waste a lot of energy from the origin, from the effort made to produce them. So what we are trying to work on for improving the fixed networks is penetration closer to the end user, going from the walls outside of the house to the different rooms, trying to have to reduce the requirements on the equipment that we deployed, because that makes production, makes usability, production faster and less impacting in terms of energy required, of effort required, and usability possibly longer. Lots of things also in the network architecture. We have to focus on that. We have to look at solutions that allow easier reconversion of the lines from one profile to another, and reducing the amount of devices that we have in the line, and making the transmission itself more efficient, packing information tighter. And that's another very good point. So lots of areas where to work, and an invitation to everyone to spend some effort in that direction. My presentation concludes here. I hope I stimulated some thoughts and positive thoughts about what we can do about it, about energy efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. I think where we're building to now in the conversation is this clarity that adopting an efficient sustainability strategy has major benefits for service providers from an operational performance, also from a revenue perspective, but also in terms of the benefit it can enable in terms of vertical industry solutions and the kind of environmental benefits it can deliver to society at large. So I'd like to invite JB Russello, CEO from Chorus, to share some of his perspectives on this particular matter.
Kia ora and namae haere mai. That's a warm Maori greetings for all of you from New Zealand. I'm JB Rousselot. I'm the Chief Executive of Chorus, which is the largest telecommunications infrastructure provider in New Zealand. We maintain and we build a network that's predominantly made up of local telephony exchanges, cabinets, copper, but now increasingly fiber asset. Chorus is proud to be one of the founding members of the World Broadband Association because we think that the WBBA can be a unified voice for the broadband industry. And it is because it's important that we continue to raise the awareness of people about the economic, the social, and the sustainability benefits of broadband so that we can continue to see investment in the right technology into the future. Now, increasingly climate change is hitting the headlines. It's no longer something that can be denied or something that can be ignored. But how big is the global carbon footprint of information technology communications? Where can we drive the biggest positive impact to support climate action? And how can we influence or help others to decarbonize? Embedding environmental sustainability into our policies and our strategy is a start. And it can help all of us achieve ambitious sustainability goals and positive outcomes so that our planet can thrive. So for us at Chorus, in our recent strategy refresh, we saw sustainability feature as a key enabler. Our focus on a thriving environment represents the work that we're doing to decarbonize and minimize waste across our network, across our operations, and across our supply chain. And we're fully committed to do all we can to reduce our impact on the planet. For us, it's also about understanding the potential impact of climate change on our business and adapting so that we're ready to face the future. This year, for the first time, Chorus has created its first emission reduction plan and also climate-related risk registers so that data and accountability can really help drive our decisions and our priorities going forward. But we also believe that we have a great product, fiber, because it's a low emission and resilient technology and because of the role it can play in lowering the emissions of businesses, of entire cities, and even countries. We know that fiber is the best and will ensure that we maintain a sustainable digital future. Why? Because fiber enables greater data capacity, because it uses less power than other technologies, because it's more resilient and therefore has lower fault rates. And given this data capacity, the low emission profile and resilience, fiber truly has the potential to support other industries to also reduce their emissions. So let me go into some of these into more details. First, the reduction in power. The benefits of fiber broadband are really coming to evidence from the reductions that we've seen in our network's own electricity consumption as we migrate people from copper to fiber, and our growth in data usage continues year on year. On our network, and probably around most of the networks in the room today, data consumption grows at about 23 to 25% per annum. And as you can see, despite that increase, as we migrate customers from copper to fiber, we've been able to reduce our energy consumption. Fiber is also the most climate-friendly technology. Early in the year, we commissioned some research along with some other local fiber companies in New Zealand, looking at the emissions footprint of the fiber network compared to other alternative broadband technologies. And what the study found was that for average speeds of 50 megabits per second and over, fiber has a lower per-user emission footprint than any other broadband alternatives. It's also showed that the emissions of fiber stays relatively flat despite increasing speed going forward to meet growing data demand, unlike other technologies. And it was great to hear that being echoed by Luca earlier today. Another compelling case for expanding fiber even further is resilience. Increasingly, we see what is called, a 1 in 100 or 1 in a 200-year event happen pretty much every year in a lot of geographies. What you can see, forgot to press the button. What you can see here is two recent examples. It's the impact of two different extreme weather events in the South Island of New Zealand. Now, clearly, our teams are ready to go and fix the faults when those things happen, but the good news on these two was that our fiber equipment was still carrying traffic by the time we showed up. And that wire, even the one that was holding back an about 10-ton piece of rock, was still transitioning traffic through this. So fiber resilience to events, to water, the fact that it's a longer asset life, far exceeds copper. And we're seeing significantly fewer faults and maintenance from fiber compared to copper. So the sustainability benefits of fiber are a clear incentive for any country to consider, and we should recognize it as a technology of choice if you think about a sustainable digital future. Now, based on the compelling proposition of fiber, we're now focusing on withdrawing copper where we have fiber available. This copper withdrawal is a key initiative for us in terms of meeting our emissions reduction plan. We've recently made our commitment to the Science-Based Target Initiative, and our target is to reduce by 62% our Scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2030 compared to 2020. And a key focus of that is reducing our electricity use. Copper withdrawal with other initiatives will see us reduce our energy consumption by 25% between now and 2030. Last year, we trialed copper withdrawal in a number of areas where we already had fiber. We fully migrated and turned off about 130 copper cabinets, and we achieved 0 complaints. That was a good thing, but also 90% broadband retention, so people moved from copper to fiber at that 90% retention. So not only is it a good decision from an environmental perspective, but it's also a good business decision to turn off the copper when you can. So following this successful trial, we're now accelerating this program, and we're going to roll it out everywhere that we have fiber. We're also working very closely with our service providers and our suppliers to understand and reduce our Scope 3 emissions. And the strong focus there is on reducing waste and on renewable electricity. Since the ultra-fast broadband rollout began in New Zealand, we've worked with our partners to collect the plastic duct offcuts so that they can be collected. The plastic is then granulated, and then we can use it again to produce some new ducting. And we've also partnered with Ecotricity, which is the only carbon zero certified electricity provider in New Zealand. Now, I know that all of us in the room probably have similar stories to tell on reducing our individual carbon footprint, but how big an impact do we have as an industry? According to the recent white paper that the WBBA produced, the entire ICT industry is accountable for roughly 2% of emissions globally. Now, this might seem small, but it's actually comparable to the airline industry, which are much more in the spotlight for their emissions than we are. Luca already mentioned it. The paper also stated that 80% of e-waste globally are discarded, burned, or illegally traded. And telecom and IT equipment are a huge contributor to that. So there's still plenty for us to stay focused on if we want to reduce our carbon footprint. The good news is we're not a sunset industry, and we have plenty of opportunities ahead of us. And in fact, we hold the potential to help other industries with their emissions reduction target. According to that recent white paper from WBBA, the Science-Based Target Initiative estimate that ICT could help reduce 15% of global CO2 emissions. Working from home, for example, is supporting lower transport emissions. A very recent large-scale study published by the Journal of Urban Sustainability has found that working from home could reduce the levels of nitrogen dioxide by 10%, and the overall level of traffic-related air pollution by 15%. The enablement of smart grids can also dramatically reduce electricity wastage by providing accurate real-time insight into demand and regulating both the production and the consumption and encouraging more responsible usage. Smart roads and smart cities also rely on broadband connectivity to regulate traffic flow, also contributing to lower greenhouse gas emissions. And simply digitalizing businesses can also bring opportunities to lower emission and waste. So the tools that are delivered by the telecom industry over fiber networks and other networks will help us transition to a net zero future. So in conclusion, sustainability is simply becoming part of how we do business today. And what we should be consider along the way is the following. First, get serious. Sustainability is not just a tick box exercise. It can bring cost saving and revenue generating opportunities to your businesses. Be ambitious and be authentic. Take the time to do a materiality assessment, to listen to key stakeholders, then set strategy with progressive and achievable sustainable targets. Be specific, have a plan. A roadmap for how you will achieve your targets, help to keep employees, stakeholders, and consumers fully engaged on that program. And then finally, team up. Work with suppliers, work with service providers, and work with peers to co-innovate and incentivize to bring change and momentum. Also, use the resource availables, and in particular the ones from the WBBA. The latest white paper published by the associations look at the environmental sustainability in telecom services providers strategy. The WBBA Sustainability Working Group continues to meet and work and is looking at other topics to focus on going forward. So get involved and help the industry decarbonize as we strive to become a net zero society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, JB. And just a reminder that on the programs that you can find on the table in front of you, there are QR codes where you can download all the WBBA's thought leadership, including the sustainability paper, which JB was referencing. And fascinating to see the photos there of the resilience of the fibre network, and a reminder that I'll never complain about extreme weather in the UK again, because it pales into insignificance. Living in the UK, I'm very, it's very apparent to me the good work that's being done at Openreach. I'd like to invite Trevor Linney, the Network Technology Director from Openreach, to talk to us now.
Having a microphone, that's got it, right. Thank you. Well, I have the pleasure of not only having spoken on sustainability yesterday, but now followed third in a chain of presenters. So I have to think of what hasn't already been said. I'm going to offer a few views in terms of some of the things that we as operators can do, and indeed just reflect on actually some of even conversations I've had since yesterday on sustainability. So as pointed out before, Openreach is deploying full fibre to sort of 25 million premises in the UK, but we're taking a number of actions when it comes to terms to what are the tangible things we can do to reduce sort of our carbon emissions, move to net zero with our networks. The first actually starts on actually where do they come from. As network operators, we tend to, especially me as a network technologist, your instinct is to go to the tin that carries the packets, or the photons. Actually, as an operator, one of our biggest sources of actually emissions for that is the field force required to maintain the copper network. So Openreach has the second largest fleet in the UK, with nearly 29,000 vehicles which currently run on diesel. And we need that to be able to maintain the sort of 30-odd million lines of copper in the network which go wrong, with single digits mean time between failure. So one of the biggest things we can actually do in terms of our direct emissions is to tackle the fleet. We've already got our first, we've already placed the first 1,600 of those 29,000 vehicles. That's not limited by the speed at which we wish to replace them. It is actually limited by the fundamental amount of vehicles available for purchase globally, because the supply chains are not geared up to be able to replace that. So we as operators almost need to be working together, signal to governments and indeed the managed supply chains, actually the volume of equipment that we're going to be needing to change out these fleets. The good news being that with part of the full fibre vision, we will no longer need 29,000 engineers to do the faults, because as JB rightly pointed out, it is a far more reliable technology. We will still have to go and repair overhead fibre runs, which have been brought down by the wind, but fundamentally it'll be a lower fault network. The second part is about the power. As with many of the other large operators, we actually use a measurable proportion of the UK grid. About 1% of all the power used in the UK is used by the BT Group. And that's sort of we're tackled by two ones. We have already bought all of our power from effectively net zero through the credits, but we're doing two things. Our research labs are actually partially powered by a solar array. This is just down one of the local fields was converted to a 14 megawatt hour solar array, which offsets at least some of our network models. And BT's been actually engaging a number of power purchase agreements. So we actually have purchased 80% of the green energy from that wind farm that's being built today for the next 10 years as part of our ability to get green energy to run our networks. The biggest one, I think everyone's agreed, and it's in the paper, is build fibre. Build fibre as fast and as big as you can, because it's fundamentally a future-proof network. And we are doing that at pace, and the trick is, with all these things, two things. One is to build it, which is the big focus, and then we have to get our customers onto it. Because unfortunately, if you're just building a new shiny fibre network and you retain all of the previous networks, it's actually adding to the total energy bill. But fundamentally, once we've got that out into the network, it is much, much lower and is the critical enabler for us as an industry to deliver the connectivity people need with the reliability that people need in a most energy efficient way. So I think this is almost the least contentious part of anything I'm going to say. The next bit is closure. Again, JP covered some of this. Fundamentally moving from an estate of existing networks, because actually when you look at Openreach's energy consumption, the vast majority of it is in green cabinets. It's in the VDSL estate, the GFast estate, which is currently providing service to in excess of 15 million people for their connectivity needs. It got them through COVID. It delivered the bandwidth that they needed for everything we needed. But fundamentally, moving from a copper-based network to a fiber-based network reduces the energy consumption by around 70% on a per-port basis. Literally, every migration that someone goes onto FTTP, we see the corresponding wattage drop on those VDSL cabinets. And so it's important we do that. The key things in terms of the policy and some of the things we need to work together is twofold. One is actually understanding for some customers, moving to full fibre, it moves the energy where it currently goes. If someone is currently on a voice-only PSTN line for their Lifeline services, they currently don't have to plug a phone in their home. It is an unpowered device. The network brings the power. Although they are relatively limited in the network, they still exist, and you're actually moving them from a place where they didn't have any power to there is now a power burden in the home. The ONTs actually consume a small amount of power. And I think the second being, you only get to close networks when every single customer has moved over. We build our fibre networks, but whilst we carry our legacy services, you're still running the two networks in parallel, although you can compact the copper network as you go. And this requires each country to come to agreements with the regulators about at what percentage do I have to build full fibre before I can stop selling the copper products, because today if Openreach hasn't built 75% of the homes, so it's not available to 75% of the homes, we can't stop selling the copper. If someone wants to buy a new copper circuit, we have to provide for equivalence basis. Once we go above 75%, we can stop selling new, and we incentivize people to move. But at some point, there is that point of how do we effectively close those networks and how do we move our customers over, which is contentious for every operator who's ever sort of tried to go to their customer, sorry, but we're no longer going to provide this service that you've been using for however long. And so this is not really a technical problem. This is actually about how you move the market, work with your customers and your customers and your customers. Because quite often, it's not that we, as Openreach, we don't have the relationship with our customers. We have a relationship with a communications provider who may or may not be a wholesaler in their own right, who have then got their customer who may or may not wholesale it to somebody else, and so on and so forth. And we have found some chains where it's maybe been 6 stages removed before you get to the actual customer relationship with the person who can actually say, we'd like to move you over. And so we get these very long value chains that make it very difficult to have the conversation about migration. The third point is actually about optimizing our network technologies. And this one I'm very passionate about because I think we as a industry could allow ourselves to be lulled into a false sense of security. Because full fiber and GPON is so much better compared to the copper technologies it's replacing, it's very easy to think, you know, we're going to get this big drop down, we do full fiber, there's the job done, energy is then under control. In reality, as we look forward, so we talk about the bandwidth growth that was referred to over time, we see that we go from a GPON technology to a 10 gig technology to a 25/50 technology to a 100 gig coherent technology. It's brilliant because we're reusing the same glass, but as it stands, they're not all going to be delivering that extra capacity for the same 0.6 watt per customer. Which means that as the technologies go up their path, we risk actually finding ourselves in absolute terms moving back up to where copper was and ultimately exceeding it. And so the burden that we're actually saying it won't be a net reduction, it'll be a long-term increase. And so I think we have to think about power in a different way. And that's almost not about the power that it dissipates when we're delivering the peak bandwidth of the day, because we know we're going to have to serve that peak bandwidth. But I think it's about thinking about it in terms of the kilowatt hours or the gigawatt hours or the terawatt hours. It's integrating the power demand over the day. And if you look at our networks, or if you look at the Openreach's networks, and I bet a very reasonable amount of money yours are the same, there'll be a peak amount of time during the day where you have a very high demand. And if you've got a very large sporting event or a very large game download, you'll see a large peak going through your networks. If you wait 2 hours, it's probably dropped by 2 orders of magnitude, and it's virtually empty. And yet, those switches, those PONs, those ONTs, those home hubs, whatever it turns out to be, are all sat there running full power, primed to carry that next peak that might not actually appear for another 90 to 100 days. And I think so we've got a mindset change about how do we move away from build it big, run it full power and don't touch it in case it breaks, to how do we take the same mentality that you see in the mobile devices, as in how do we stretch every single joule out of that battery, throttling the processes, turning off radios, turning off everything you can, or your car. If you haven't moved to an EV yet, if you get to the traffic lights, what does it do? The start-stop comes on. All about trying to minimize the total integrated amount of emissions, not the instantaneous peak you might see. And I think what we need to do as a collection of operators, and indeed closely working with vendors, to say how do we create and standardize those abilities to create dynamic behaviors in the equipment. That means the exam question is not not how fast can I go. It's not even how many bits can I get per joule. It's actually how do I engineer a network to be my total lowest amount of energy over time consumed whilst delivering that ability to have peak bandwidth. And that's a mindset change for the industry. And one we have to, as the WBBA, we have to encourage the discussion and drive. That will feature absolutely standardization, future PON, new energy reduction techniques, interworking being critical. Every time we've tried to do energy before, it's always been, oh, well, what if it doesn't work properly? What about the interoperability? What if this, that, and the other happens and the customer goes offline? We have to crack that. We have to take it off the table. It may be that we need new architectures. We talk about, look at a vendor's roadmap, it'll be, we support a 4 terabit switching capacity. It's like, well, are you still burning the same amount of power when it's only switching 4 gigabits at 3 in the morning? How many of us have asked the question? Can they actually throttle it dynamically? Do we need a different architecture? And I think there's a fascinating question around how often do you take the newest box? Because on one hand, I'm sitting there going, well, actually, every time we get a new silicon geometry, you get twice the performance for half the power. That's great. And then you sit there and go, but if I've got e-waste and I'm taking the boxes that I've currently deployed and I'm actually trying to take those out after 3 years because my energy goes, hang on a minute, so I can reduce my energy by replacing the box, but the box itself has got an energy cost. How do I end up optimizing that? And do you end up with more modular designs? Do you end up with something fundamentally different about how you can continue to scale your network in the most energy efficient manner whilst actually minimizing your total impact on the equipment you are procuring? And having reflected on that, I realized that, on one hand, I could be banging a drum going, I want the latest chips every 18 months, then looking at the pile of equipment in the corner and going, oh, what am I going to do with that then? So I think that whole life cycle of network equipment, how do you upgrade it over time, again, is a really important factor. But I absolutely encourage people to say we need to be setting the exam question now to influence the standards and the technology that's going to be available in 3 years' time, which means the networks that we've built by 2030 have got all the dynamic behaviors we need. If we stay silent, we'll get roughly the same engineering paradigm that we've always had, which is full power all of the time. So, having had many of the excellent points covered by the previous presenters, just to reiterate, these are the sort of steps that each of us as operators can take. Absolutely move to zero operations in terms of the procurement of your power, the management of your fleet, and everything associated with it. Absolutely, we have to build and move to full fiber networks, not as overlays, not just the cities. How do we get to every single person in the country on those networks so we can turn off the networks, including some very legacy ones? We've still got networks. I've still got X25 in the network doing some things. There's still a client on some of it. All shut it all down, migrate the customers, and get them onto full fiber. And then I think absolutely the last point is ruthlessly focus on absolute energy reduction, not per bit. It's a lie we tell ourselves to feel better. Absolute energy reduction integrated over time so that when we look at our future network equipment, we can see the total number of gigawatt hours consumed go down, despite the fact it's delivered ever bigger numbers of gigabits and terabits per second. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Trevor. I think a ruthless focus there came loud and clear through those conclusions, and those conclusions I suspect will be some of the building blocks for the panel discussion, which is just being prepared for right now. So I would like to welcome back onto the stage JB Russolo, Chorus CEO, Trevor Linney, Network Technology Director from Openreach. For the first time this afternoon, Vincent Garnier, Director General of the FTTH Council Europe, and as our panel chair, Martin Kriener, World Broadband Association Director General.
I might take that one there to keep you all in mind.
Sure, yeah. And your line of sight.
My line of sight, exactly. So, first of all, great set of presentations, Luca's presentation, JB's, Trevor's. Vincent, you haven't been introduced yet, so maybe I could kick this off with asking you to introduce yourself and also just share some thoughts from the FTTH Council.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Director General of the FTTH Council Europe. This is a trade association, non-for-profit. We regroup 160 members, all gathering under the objective to promote the use of full fiber network throughout Europe for the benefits of citizens and businesses. So we regroup operators of a variety of models. We regroup vendors from hardware, software, active, passive equipment, service providers, but also investors and any academic and consultant interested in this topic. So what we do is we influence policymakers, government. We advise them whenever they have to bring forward a new piece of legislation. And we are also contributing to educating the ecosystem with market studies, with technology reports, webinar. We organize our own conference in a few months' time. And we are a place for networking. So, of course, it's an opportunity for business. It's an opportunity for anyone to share best practices and ultimately contribute to a speedier development and adoption of fiber throughout Europe.
And with that sort of scope of membership and focus on the fiber side, the pure fiber side, how is sustainability becoming a topic of discussion, or for how long has it been a hot topic of discussion within?
Well, surprisingly,
FTTH?
it has become only recently a topic of discussion. And that was triggered by an operator, actually, who came to us saying, well, we want to talk about it. We want to build a working group, and that was 2 years ago. Now, this is really taking shape. We see increasingly that it becomes at the top of the strategy of every of our members. Each of our members is not exactly at the same, I would say, position on the change curve. You know, you have first the shock, then you're in denial, then you gradually fall into depression before you climb up the different stages of thinking about a plan and implementing it. So some of them are probably still in the shock phase, but others are, helping and dragging them in the right direction. So we are working on this, and I can maybe elaborate a bit further later on what we concretely do.
Great. So two great presentations there. And I didn't disagree, I think, with anything I heard in both presentations, but I did feel that, due to the short length of time, it doesn't cover all the things I'm interested in. But I did want to pick on just your last point that you were quite passionate about there, Trevor, where you were talking about it's all about absolute energy reduction as opposed to reducing, improving the efficiency per bit transported or whatever. 100% agree with that. But I had a meeting yesterday with GESI, which is the Global Sustainability Organization, and they were arguing that if you can shift to 100% recyclable energy, 100% recycled power, then absolute energy reduction then just becomes a business decision for the telco, because it does reduce your or improve your bottom line. But from a planetary point of view, the 100% recycled gets us a long way down that road.
So, I think you're right in one respect in terms of the end, but I think equally we have to look in the context of how much additional load is heading to each of our countries' national grids. So it's not that we're going to consume the amount of energy we have today. We're in the middle of a pivot, which is going to say, actually, that same national grid is having to be invested in and scaled to convert the way we heat all of our homes. It's going to have to charge all of our vehicles. It's going to have to deal with so much load. So it's not about necessarily, we haven't got enough capacity in terms of renewables today. We're going to have to build a huge amount. And so I think actually saying, well, an operator can just free run because it's now green doesn't count. We need to reduce the amount of our burden on the national grids so that it's available for all the other multiple reasons that demands are going to be placed on it. And I think it would be sort of irresponsible to say we can let communications free run up to 1, 2, 3, 4% of a national grid just because it happens to be green. So I think it's actually still a drive down our load. That means there's power there for all the other use cases that are coming through.
So it's not just about emission sustainability, there's a bigger story at play here. The less energy, less stress you're putting on your national grid, the more space you leave for a hospital to who might need it or whatever. So,
well, and it's about peak demand, because of course, if our peak demand for bandwidth is coinciding with the peak from the households, and again, that means you've got that's a grid that's having to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So us being able to smooth out and remove some of that peak means the whole system will benefit from that, because unfortunately it tends to be our peak is also when everybody's at home, they're heating their houses, they're lighting their houses, they're probably having a cup of tea just before they watch Netflix. You know, it's all kind of simultaneous concurrent demand. So I think...
And JP, sort of a CEO perspective on that, presumably more focused on the bottom line impact of, if we reduce our energy consumption, we save dollars.
Definitely that there is that in there, but the reality is investors are now also asking you, what is it that you're doing? The TCFD are starting to kind of force every company to disclose what it is that they're doing in terms of their impact on the environment. And so some of it will be driven by cost reductions that you can do. Some of it will be driven by the fact that that's what investors want companies to do. And I really like the challenge that Trevor was putting in terms of that peak demand and what do we do for the rest of the day. I was probably in that comfortable phase of the denial curve, etc. And suddenly he's put me back into the uncomfortable zone. But it is true. We're going to have conversations with end users in saying, while you're at home not using your device, switch them off, do the right thing. We've never applied that same dynamic to our own business because, as Trevor was saying, we want the thing to be there and we don't want to touch it because the more we touch it, the more it breaks.
Yeah.
But that's probably not going to be viable in the long term.
And is that, Trevor outlined a number of different approaches, obviously standardization, conversations with suppliers. Is there anything that can be done both of them are medium term solutions? Is there any short-term solution? Like, can you switch off chunks of your network, when you're outside the peak, or is that just too scary?
Well, there's a lot of configuration that needs to be made, so you'd have to kind of switch a number of customers from one device that you turn off to another one that's now only running at half the usage. I was talking to one of the vendors who's a member of the WBBA yesterday, and they had a new OLT that had 4 different fans, and that was more from a resilience perspective. Well, how about turning off 2 of them while we're not at full capacity for that device? That's not something that they had thought of, but that's something that probably could be done relatively short term.
In terms of short-term action we're doing, I guess, is as we're in the process of migration from legacy to full fibre, one of the actions we're taking is actually monitoring the fill of our equipment. And so quite often you'll have, as customers get loaded onto the network, you fill them up on ports at a time, but as they leave the network, they go in an unorderly fashion. So you end up with 6 customers on a line card on the 4th one and this many customers. So we're actually now saying, when we drop below a certain balance, going out to the network, rejumpering stuff, compacting the equipment, removing the legacy, shutting down the second pieces of equipment, and just balancing that off against the fact that we've got to put an engineer in a vehicle that then is going to use diesel to go out to the cabinet. So we're balancing that trade-off of how often do you visit, how often do you compact, but they are literally energy savings you can start banking tomorrow by looking at what are your idle assets, what can you turn down, and what can you compact and close.
I would say, the shortest in terms of time frame that could be delivered is this focus on being able to turn off copper. I was hearing Trevor describe how, in their environments, they have to get to 75% take up before they can just stop sell, not even turn off. We're privileged. We've managed to work with the regulator in New Zealand where if fiber is available in an area, with a 6 months notice period, we can actually force the final migration of the last customers that are still in copper. Now, we can do that because we're already in the high percentage of take-up. Overall in New Zealand, we're about 70%. Auckland is at 80% take-up. So it's easier to do that. But having that tool to ultimately be able to say, okay, we now have enough people on fiber. Fiber is available. Other networks are available. Some of the customers might go on fixed wireless. But being able to go and say, I now turn off copper, is really the most efficient tool that I think a lot of operators would need to be able to do that.
Yeah, and Vincent, is that something you're hearing as well? From
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I just want to say that I concur 100% with everything which was said about the benefits of fiber. That was very clearly explained. What we are now trying to do is to make sure that it's also very well understood by government and regulators, because clearly in Europe the choice for fiber has been made on the basis of, I would say, the technical and bandwidth related benefits of fiber, but probably regulator and government have not factored in the benefits in terms of sustainability. And we still see some kind of sometimes trade-offs in the allocation of state aid towards technology which from a sustainability standpoint are really not as good as fiber. So we would definitely encourage government to factor in the sustainability element, which will necessarily bring them towards copper switch of planning, because you could very well keep the two network in parallel from a pure customer usage perspective, but if you look at it from the angle of sustainability, it doesn't make absolute any sense to have two networks. So I think factoring in sustainability from a regulatory framework perspective will necessarily lead in acceleration of a regulator working with incumbents to facilitate a well-organized copper switch off. It needs to be planned, it needs to be managed, and that's very important.
It seems like that's a topic that you'd be pushing at an open door, really, with most regulators. It may not be true because regulators can have their own perspective, but in terms of once you get above that certain percent, and you've the fallback position of fixed wireless access for whatever customers that you literally can't get the fiber to, but you want to switch off your copper network.
Europe currently, if you look at take-up, the situation across Europe is more 25%. So you're saying an average of 50% of coverage and 50% take-up, which means that only 25% of households are currently having internet services on fiber. So you can already see, on average, the distance we are from being in a position to switch off copper in a big scale. Some countries are much more mature.
Exactly.
Some network operator could maybe envisage that in some areas, but planning is essential. And even though those countries where coverage is only at 50%, they should already think about a plan, because it's a lot of discussion, it's a lot of negotiation, it takes years to put in place the planning. So let's start now, even if implementation is in 2030.
Yeah. If I could switch to another aspect of this, and Luca mentioned, I think the statistic he showed was 35% of all the energy consumed is to do with air conditioning or fans and so on. And you talked about a big number around your fleet and so on. Is there a lot of the focus, at least that I read about on this topic, is about the energy consumption of the network equipment?
Mm-hmm.
But is that kind of the tail, and the big dog is actually all the other stuff?
Well, it's interesting. The power and cooling one is actually, it's a shadow of the network equipment that's deployed. So if you think about when you're taking watts or kilowatts into the equipment, and it processes them, but not efficiently, it then comes out as heat. So actually the aircon bill is directly proportional to how much energy you're dissipating off these things. And now as we get to bigger and bigger switches to be able to do the terabits, then actually running them full speed is directly is causally driving air conditioning. Power is driven by the inefficiency of going from your AC supply or your high voltage down to 48 volt DC and your efficiency of the rectifier. So again, both of them actually says if you drive down the amount of watts going into the OLTs, then you will have a proportionately over-indexed impact on your energy bill, because your AC and your rectifier losses will drop. So actually, one of the way we look at it is the 30% overhead is actually driven by the equipment rather than an independent one that's can't be addressed.
Yeah. Okay.
But you're right in terms of the fleet and some of our wider emissions. It's a massive. If you look at our overall CO2, that's a big thing. And indeed, shipping, replacing ONTs, the plastics they use, the cardboard boxes, they in plastic bags they may not have been in, switch mode power supply. There's a whole wrap of stuff that we put in customers' homes, which indeed drives the wider impact. And if you think about that, I might deploy OLTs. I'm going to have to deploy thousands of those, tens of thousands of OLTs. If I connect my 25 million, then even a tiny amount of environmental impact saved on an OLT by using reusable plastics or stripping out a cable tie from the cardboard box, times it by 10, 15, 25 million just in the UK, or times it by however many billion globally, and that's an absolutely massive amount that you've made from probably what could be a couple of pence cost decision that we'll all sort of think, oh, well, what's the harm it can do? You times it up to a global effect, and it's absolutely massive.
And do you see the same?
Yeah, and I was going to say, one of the other points that Trevor did in his presentation is, in a copper world, all of the power was in the exchange and we powered the telephone. And now we actually have the power being demanded in the home. And it's interesting to see with the models that are taken, and especially when you have a wholesale provider, Openreach or ourselves in New Zealand, you actually end up with two devices in the home, because we'll have an ONT, and then the retail service provider will typically insist on having their own modem because they want to control that experience from the end user. We tried last year to actually have a Wi-Fi capable ONT and said to the retail service provider, we'll save you the need of having another device. It will be a cost saving for you, it will be better. None of them were keen to take it, because for them, controlling that in-home experience with their own Wi-Fi modem was an important thing. So, we will run into some commercial limitations on how much we can push, how efficient the delivery of fiber is in the home.
Somebody mentioned in one of the panel sessions this morning on the killer app for fiber. He says, well, didn't know what the killer app was, but if it was anything, it was consumer impatience. Yep. And that's the downside of consumer impatience. By the way, if anybody has a question in the audience, raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you.
And I think, just to extend that, though, it's an interesting one, because we talk about the capacity being available. The implications of having a gigabit capable anytime is then that the in-home is not just moved, it's not just one device now in the hallway, it's now a mesh radio network that's being there, that's always running at full power. And so actually the implication of the gigabit capable networks is not just the access section. You look left and right to the in-home, delivering a gigabit in the home, and indeed then the backhaul, the peering and the internet, that again was all lifting. So that delivery of 1 gig is an upwards pressure on almost every single component. And I think actually in home, we're in the point where I don't think people have necessarily realised yet, and the focus on energy prices coming through is in quite how many watts are in their home in order to facilitate their home network, and that will come under scrutiny, I think.
I remember Amazon saying to me that any time they can move stuff out to the edge, it saves them a massive amount of energy as well as on improving experience. Vincent, we had a conversation there the other day, and we were talking about some of the softer aspects that surround this, like more sustainable companies are more attractive to their employees. More sustainable companies are more attractive to new customers. More sustainable companies, can gain access to lower cost debt and so on in the markets. So, and you were saying that's something that you've looked at within FTTH and had those discussions.
Yeah, it's clear that it's become, at least in Europe, it now is clearly a strategy. It's the decision of the board of every company. And you mentioned your investors are asking you, and you putting that to your suppliers, and suppliers are also our members. So the entire chain, and what is important is, at least what we try to do at the FTTH Council, we try and help every piece of the value chain to show best practices, but we are moving towards trying to set up a common way of measuring progresses, because metrics are very important, and absolute value metrics, not percentages. But we try and set up a system whereby we can align the industry we are representing to communicate in a compatible way about progresses, because I think that really helps communication between the different stages. And even if we are only 2 or 4% of the entire problem, what I think is if one industry is moving in the right direction, we shouldn't forget that we are connected with multiple other industries. And we're putting, therefore, an enormous pressure on other industry to also move in the right direction. So it's not because we are only a tiny fraction of the problem that making significant move in the right direction is not going to have an impact, domino effect, which can have a big, much bigger effect on the society. So we are extremely committed to do our part and help those who are still in shock to move in the right direction, and help. And measuring is a key part of what we can do.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think what's really important is to simplify how many different ways you can measure it. One of the frustrations I've had is there's probably 4 different emerging competing standards about how to measure your carbon footprint, your sustainability achievements, etc. And so if we could pretty quickly, at least within this industry, kind of agree on what are the simple ways for us to measure progress, to set targets, to ultimately account for the carbon footprint of the oil industry, that would be really helpful. There are so many acronym initials that I'm confronted whenever I get into this that it's frustrating.
Indeed, and I guess ultimately, as telecommunication providers, we're going to be in everybody's scope 3. I mean, there isn't going to be a single other industry that's not using our infrastructure to deliver some or all of their business in terms of the digital underpinning of it. So we're going to have to understand how we're measuring it, how we're improving it, and how we report on it, because as the scope 3 comes through, we're going to have to say, well, we're playing this part in virtually every other business in our markets.
We talked about other aspects of circular economy in terms of say reuse or using refurbished equipment and so on. There's a number of brief mentions on that. Is that something that you specifically have a business goal to focus on? I read an article, I didn't speak to Orange about that, but I read an article there a few months back where they were talking about potential savings of up to $1 billion over a period of years through using refurbished equipment rather than new equipment. And that may not be obviously at the top end, it may well be refurbished power supplies or whatever. So is that something that you've looked at within?
So at a small scale, I think I mentioned it in the speech I made, which was as we were rolling out the network, we had plenty of plastic ducts, offcuts. Those would have normally been binned and end up in a landfill somewhere, and it's plastic, so it probably has a shelf life of hundreds of years before it actually deteriorates. We actually proactively worked with the people who were rolling out the network to make sure we collected all of those, then put them into a machine that crunched it and then recycled it and produced more of it. It's a small thing, but it shows you. The other big one that I think a lot of telcos did as they moved fiber further down the network is recycle the big copper sheath that we had in the ground. It's very economical when you do this with a 600 pair sheath, because you pull it out and you can recycle the copper. The further down you go into the network, the harder it is. And when you get to the single pair that goes into a home, it's almost impossible to do it economically. So there's definitely been a focus on the industry to look into that. I haven't seen it at the equipment layer, so the idea of reusing used network equipment, but maybe you've seen it.
I mean, certainly we've looked at equipment recycling and how you do the benefits. I think you get relatively small return for that, and quite often the reason it's being replaced is because it's been superseded, and therefore you're not going to get a reuse out of a number of the components that are in the board. I think the other challenge we've had is we've actually asked industry, so almost what would it cost us to have, say, use recycled plastics in a device? And you'd intuitively say, well, recycling should be cheaper. But the converse is actually true. You end up paying more for a recycled device than to use virgin plastic. So there's some interesting things now, but it might be a scale thing. as in if there's a lot more of the system is, as we all optimise for a circular economy, it does go that way, but almost it seems like it's still in this counterintuitive world where sometimes actually recycled seems to cost us more money than less, which we need to work on together, or indeed maybe, again, that's something if every operator is saying actually, the hygiene level for this is we will not accept, the use of virgin plastics for a lot of
it's probably a scale issue as much as
the scale
anything.
will come out.
And does this come out, Vincent, in FTTH as well? The recycling argument rather than, say, the power
I don't have a precise example to mention, but indeed we are reporting best practices and case study on our website on the sustainability section, and there are multiple initiatives especially on the vendor side, to try and recycle as much as possible. That I would say that's probably the first reaction that manufacturers are having. How can we, limit packaging? How can we recycle things? So I think that's part of the little thing that everybody is doing. But as Trevor said, there's no silver bullet. I would think definitely the best way is probably not to spend more somehow, because you were mentioning, green energy. Supposedly green energy still has a carbon footprint, and the only one you without carbon footprint is really the what you do not spend. Even solar energy, everything has a carbon footprint unless it's it's not used.
That's absolutely true.
A great example is that there is one vendor here today who's got a booth that is totally made out of cardboard. I encourage you guys to go and check it out, and let's make sure there's more of those at the next year.
Oh, that's good.
It's just good. You walk by and you go, that's different, and then you realize it's all made of cardboard, including the seats, the chairs, etc. Fantastic. Yeah. Good on them.
No, absolutely. I did see that. It's very cool. But I think it is actually, there's not going to be, with this, there's not one silver bullet that's going to do anything. Even that it sounds like a token effort, say, okay, we're going to shrink the size of our boxes and we're going to use that. But actually, you then think, well, how many tens of thousands, 100,000 or a million units are being shipped around the world or on aeroplanes, and if you save 10% of the volume in the packing, what does that actually do, and how does that translate through into the the comparable number in air freight or shipping? So it is going to be a vast number of small interventions that sum to very big ones, and that comes back to my mindset point. Energy reduction, use of a circular economy and sustainability almost has to have the same level of importance, if not higher, with every decision we make commercially up there with performance and price. And until energy is in that same sort of trinity of asks that every operator says of everything we're going to buy or do, it's as important, then we won't get that mindset change in the whole ecosystem that we need in order to deliver the overall sustainability goal.
I think that's a great one to leave this on, guys. That was a really interesting discussion. We could probably go on for much longer, but I think it is encouraging that the impression I get anyway is that everybody is now roughly coming to the table, maybe slightly frightened or scared, or maybe willingly, but they're all coming to the table, and it's the next 24, 36 months is going to show whether we can actually make a difference. So thank you very much. I'd like to ask for a round of applause for our presenters and panelists.
Well done.
Good stuff. Good
Thank
stuff,
you.
guys.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you, Martin, JB, Vincent, and Trevor. Some really important conclusions there. Sustainability by design, making sure that sustainability is as important in the formula as performance and price, and the role that operators, vendors, regulators, manufacturers, indeed the whole telco supply chain needs to play in order to make that positive sustainability impact. We are going to take a break for some well-deserved coffee, some water. Invite you to come back here at 4 p.m. We'll then have an examination of best practice as evidenced by some of the most innovative broadband use cases being delivered out there in the industry right now. And then also to stay for our networking drinks at 5 p.m. So please do join us for that. Invite your colleagues, partners, and peers and customers. And we'll see you back here at 4 for that final session with the networking drinks at 5 p.m. If I could just finally ask this afternoon's speakers to join us back on stage for a closing photograph. Thank you. So welcome back to everybody for the final session of today's World Broadband Association annual event. Just a reminder, we'll be having a drinks reception from here from about 4:45 onwards. Like to invite you to bring your customers, your partners, your peers, colleagues from across the show floor to join us from 4:45. Just looking ahead to this next session, one of the fundamental questions when we were establishing and mobilizing the WBBA was, does broadband have its appropriate share of the wider telco industry share of voice? And the unanimous response from across the membership was, no, it doesn't. So creating a broadband advocacy working group seemed like the appropriate next step to really establishing that collective voice that we talked about earlier on. So what we're going to analyze in this final session of our time together today are some of those most innovative, interesting, and real-life use cases which are being deployed right now. So during the session, we're going to hear perspectives from Bjorn Capens, Vice President of Fixed Networks for Europe at Nokia, Sylvia Kashish, Principal Industry Analyst at Ookla. But first of all, I'd like to welcome on screen, unfortunately can't be with us today, my Omdia colleague and Principal Analyst, Peter Boyland.
So hello to everybody at Network X. My apologies, I can't be there in Amsterdam in person this year, but hopefully this presentation will be the next best thing. So I'm here today to talk to you about a project that Omdia has been working with the World Broadband Association on to produce a series of case studies and white papers to bring some information to the market about best practice. So my group was entitled Broadband Case Study Success Stories, with a subtitle of The Power of High-Speed Broadband to Benefit Consumers and Improve Society. So the working group was the WBBA, the World Broadband Association, with a team of service providers and vendors, and Omdia itself, to produce this white paper. Initially, I'll introduce myself quickly. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Boyland. I'm a principal analyst focused on fixed market and advanced messaging within the digital consumer services team. And my team identifies and develops strategies across broadband marketing and communications. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the white paper that we produced. So it was conceived, as I say, by the World Broadband Association Improved Marketing Working Group, and we were aiming to identify successful case studies that demonstrate the potential of high-speed broadband connectivity. So we had a couple of parameters to work with within this case study. Initially, we wanted real-life case studies, not just potential use cases. So this is case studies that are actually already in existence in the market. We wanted them to be highly relevant to modern connectivity, and we wanted to see some measurable success. So this is some things like KPIs or some evidence that they delivered a relevant and beneficial service to the end user. And this is a quote from Kurt Rogers from Chorus in New Zealand, who was good enough to be chair of the working group. One thing all the case studies have in common is that they all enable positive change to society, to the economy and to the environment. And the emphasis here, I think, is on the positive and really how broadband can help improve the economy and society as a whole. So I'll go through the case studies as we produce them. So we examined 5 diverse case studies from both the service provider end of things and from equipment vendors. So this is China Telecom and Chorus at the service provider end, and 2 from Huawei and 1 from Nokia at the equipment vendor end of things. So they covered both the consumer and the enterprise sectors as well. So it's a broad section of the offering, and a wide range of consumers and end users are represented within these case studies, with the 2 not necessarily always being the same thing. So I'll go through these case studies quite quickly. I don't really have time, unfortunately, to do them all justice, but if you are interested in this, I would urge you to go to the World Broadband Association website. The link will be provided at the end, and read through the case studies, because there's a lot more detail on there, and it does it a lot more justice than I have time to give it. So the first case study was from China Telecom, and this was their e-surfing webcam. This is a home security and care product which integrates real-time monitoring, photo and video recording, motion detection, and artificial intelligence. and it aims to ease concerns about home safety and security, such as caring for children and the elderly. And the service allows users to check up on real-time monitoring and playback anywhere and at any time by using an app on their smartphone. And along with a basic surveillance camera, they also have other add-ons like visual doorbells or other types of terminals. And this product can be used to cover a variety of scenarios, such as caring for children or elders, and also home surveillance and security, but also other aspects like entertaining pets and possibly even reporting on events such as birthday parties. The next case study was from Chorus in New Zealand, and this was enabling smart transport with a fibre broadband connection. So this really leveraged a mass market broadband network to enable smart transport within Auckland, which is New Zealand's largest city. So Auckland Transport has more than 3,000 CCTV cameras that they use to monitor their roads, ferries and train stations, that kind of thing. But they needed a high broadband connectivity, which is consistent, reliable and cost effective. And while fibre is well known for being the best technology, traditional business grade point-to-point fibre services were being seen as a little bit too expensive to connect these CCTV cameras. So Chorus was able to step in and fully meet the needs of the smart cities. And they developed a bespoke project for Auckland Transport, which was based on their existing gigabit passive optical network, PON network. And they were able to offer this to Auckland Transport at a more attractive price point than building the network from the ground up. Our next case study is from Hawaii, and this was improving home broadband with using fibre to the room. So for those of you who don't know, fibre to the room is basically an extension of fibre to the home, where every room within the house is connected by fibre optics rather than just the home itself, and then the network connected to the room via Wi-Fi. And they'd identified that a lack of Wi-Fi bandwidth and poor coverage can lead to frequent video and game lag and a poor business experience. So they launched their fibre to the room solution to help operators extend their bandwidth across the home and enabling gigabit Wi-Fi coverage of the whole home without loss of speed and improving the user experience. I mean, as we've all seen in recent years, things like 4K and 8K video, cloud virtual reality in VR, online education, online office, things like live video and other services have become even more popular. I mean, this obviously started with COVID when people were forced to do these kind of things from home, but it's something that we've seen as prevailing into the post-COVID era. And Huawei were able to connect various terminals via Wi-Fi, then this has become the norm, but this has struggled to meet data demand. So fibre to the room is being seen as a next generation solution to providing better home connectivity and ultimately a better user experience. Our next case study is also from Huawei. This one is quite complex. It was a solution to help carriers provide reliable and low-cost network solutions to help enterprises implement digital transformation. And this example was for a company called Guangdong Shangjing Precision Manufacturing, and it explores the potential of F5G-based all-optical smart factory connectivity and the role of industrial optical networks in the manufacturing industry. So to give you a little bit of background, China's manufacturing industry was previously very highly labour intensive, and it's currently in a period of transition, of structural adjustment and industrial upgrading. And small and medium-sized enterprises in particular are in quite urgent need of digital transformation, but their technical capabilities are a little bit weak at the moment. So this digital transformation case study was able to address issues including a complex network topology, which was creating unreliability and difficulty expanding capacity. There was also frequent equipment damage occurring and a poor Wi-Fi experience. So Huawei's F5G industrial optical network is a solution for the entire manufacturing campus, covering the production network, the office network, monitoring network, and the wireless access network. So really a solution to connect the entire factory using one network and eliminate sort of stop gaps and eliminate choke points and really mean that the whole factory is working as one. And finally, our next case study was from Nokia, and this is enabling operators to cut broadband network energy consumption. So Nokia identified a new chipset which brings power savings of over 50% within the broadband network, and this helps operators to meet emission and sustainability goals with growing broadband usage and penetration. So really, they recommend that investing in power-efficient network technologies can significantly reduce the carbon footprint of broadband access networks. And they think network operators should consider accelerating the phase-out of copper and selecting the most power-efficient network equipment. So this could be upgrading passive optical networks, PON networks, to XGS PON or 25G PON to increase the bits delivered per watt consumed. So as part of the white paper, we examined the expected benefits that we were expecting per case study, as you can see from the ticks in green on the right. And we examined a range of benefits for things like service innovation or improvements, improving speeds, improving latency, customer satisfaction, and some more complicated benefits like socioeconomic benefits or meeting a government or regulatory initiative. So our white paper really asked the contributors to identify which expected benefits that they would find from each case study. And as you can see by the broad spectrum of the green ticks, we covered quite a number of benefits across the 5 case studies. So from these benefits, these were the top 3 that we identified. The first one is service innovation and improvement, which doesn't necessarily come as a surprise, but it's really about keeping your product fresh and particularly adjusting to changing demands. As I say, we've seen a lot of changes in demands in the post-COVID world from people working from home. And this is really about recommending that operators stay flexible in order to meet these changing demands and set themselves up for the future. The second top 3 benefit was in lower latency, which is something of a surprise because we would perhaps previously expected this to be improvements in speed, but lower latency came out top. So again, this is in anticipation of demand from some fresh use cases that maybe demand lower latency, things like AR, VR, and particularly things within the metaverse. And the final anticipated benefit that was in the top 3 was greater customer satisfaction. Again, this one doesn't really come as a huge surprise, but it's more about satisfaction, not just on price point, because broadband operators have traditionally just tried to impress the consumer by reducing the price point. But this is more about bundling, innovation, and other things such as sustainability. So this brings us on to the key recommendations from the white paper. So the first recommendation that we identified was to do with broadband bundling opportunities beyond entertainment. So some of our case studies show China Telecom using connected home offerings, but this also goes beyond to things like Huawei demonstrating the use of fiber to the room to improve the home broadband experience. So it's really just about using the bundling aspect of a broadband offering to improve the user experience, and it's about thinking a little bit beyond just the basic bundling that we see at the moment. The next recommendation was to do with consumers and end users and not necessarily the same. So this is really, I think the primary concern would always be whoever is paying the end bill, but particularly in many enterprise scenarios, including the one that we've demonstrated, the end user will often be a third party. So good service delivery, you must always consider the needs of both, with the ultimate goal of benefiting people's lives and ultimately society as a whole. The third recommendation was using new solutions to address old problems. So this is things like fibre to the room and the fresh use of fibre resources that we saw Chorus using within Auckland Transport. And these should be considered to meet demand, particularly in enterprise and industrial scenarios. And this is really about operators maximising their network investment, particularly in things like fibre to the home and fibre to the room, which is expensive. So it's really about looking at new solutions to existing problems and setting yourself up for a better point in the future. And that brings us nicely to our final recommendation, which is anticipating future demands. So solutions such as fibre to the room and multi-network integration, they may seem a little bit extravagant for current consumer needs, which are mostly being met by fibre and Wi-Fi. But demand for data continues to ramp up, particularly as more and more people are doing more and more stuff at home. So service providers that begin to offer these kind of solutions now will gain a first mover advantage as data demands increase and these solutions become the norm. So really that's it from me for this presentation. I've got a bit of a call to action now in terms of joining the World Broadband Association. If you're impressed by anything you've seen today, then please get in touch. The web address is at the bottom. So we're looking for feedback on any of the white papers, any of the case studies, or really any of the presentations you've seen today. And we welcome the chance to discuss with you how you can benefit or contribute to the success of the World Broadband Association going forward. And in terms of this presentation, we're also building a library of successful case studies, such as that will include the 5 you've already seen and more that are currently being written. And if you think you have something that would add to this library and that you'd like to share with your peers, we'd particularly welcome these contributions. So please get in touch with myself or somebody from within the World Broadband Association if you're interested. So this is my email address here if you'd like to get in touch. Thank you for listening today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and all the best. Thank you. Goodbye.
With thanks to Peter. So talking about the fact that we at the WBBA are building this catalogue of success stories and case studies, I'd like to welcome Silvia Kashish from UCLA onto the stage, principal analyst, who will talk to us a little bit more about some of the studies that she's been looking at and UCLA's perspectives on what's making for success in the broadband industry.
Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Silvia Kashish. I'm the principal analyst at UCLA, and I'm going to take you through some of the stories that we see from UCLA perspective. So very quickly, UCLA. Everybody heard of UCLA? Great, speed is intelligence. Okay, I don't have to bore you with all the details about the company history and so on. All I want to say is UCLA's mission is to make the internet better, faster, and more accessible to everyone. And that's one of the reasons we are part of this organization. So, oops, apologies. In the research that we do at UCLA, we look at speeds, and we have a wealth of information related to what actual end users get in terms of speeds. So I have recently compared fixed median download speeds across 160 countries versus GDP at PPP, just to try to understand whether there's any sort of correlation between the country's wealth and the speeds they're getting. And the correlation is very weak. So what you can see in here is there are quite a few factors that influence how fast the internet is in given countries. So number one, infrastructure. We have heard throughout the show that different type of infrastructure depends on where you are. So you might have full fiber coverage, let's say in New Zealand, but you still rely on quite a lot of ADSL network in the UK. So infrastructure number one, affordability. Can people actually afford upgrading to faster speeds? Can they actually afford having internet? Equipment. You might have hundreds of megabits coming into your home, but if you don't have a router that can actually work with it, you're not going to get good speeds within your home. So actual equipment, the PCs, the routers that you have, they're very important. And we have heard a bit about regulation. Regulation is important. If there's stimulus in the country is going to perform better. Competition. In countries when there's a monopoly, you're not really going to see a very good networks being rolled out, because why would you? And last but not least, end users. So we can look at it from very different perspectives. So one is whether the end users have the skills, whether they are digitally literate. So in the UK today, there was announced by Virgin Media they're going to put together a program. Is it me? Sorry? Okay. Whether or not people actually are able to use the internet, they can make the best experience online. So that's very important, the skills, the digital literacy, but also demand. Whether they want fast internet, they might be quite happy with what they currently are getting. And that's one of the discussions that we've been having throughout this show, and what we've heard is, if you're getting any internet, is it better than none? So that's one of the questions. When you look at the charting here, you can see a few outliers. So there are a few countries that perform better than the economic peers, and one of those countries is actually Chile. So we took a look at why Chile is actually performing quite well. So Chile, on our global index, is actually at number 2. They have very good household broadband penetration, 83%. According to Omdia data, 39% of households have already fiber. And the median download speed, so the actual speed across all of the operators, across all the country, is almost at 200 megabits per second. Again, I try not to move. When you go to and look at the chart across dozens of cities, you can see the speeds that operators provide in between 200 and 300 megabits per second. So why is that countries such as Chile is able to achieve that? Well, 6 out of 10 providers, so those that have more than 3% market share, actually are providing more than 100 megabits per second. So that's still using ADSL network. There's fiber, but not all of this is based on fiber. There's a very healthy market competition, so there's dispersed market power. And there's quite a lot of fiber-backed equity funds present in the market. So you have the Movistar Mundo, the government is very active, and the regulator, the SAPTER, is extremely active in ensuring that the end users understand what sort of speeds they get. So they actually look at the guaranteed minimum download speed, whereby the users can check whether what the operator is saying that they're actually getting. So that's important in terms of understanding what sort of speed you're getting, why would you need to get it, and then doing something with that. Looking at the UK, I mean, we've had Openreach BT talking. UK is the country where I live, and obviously quite close to my heart. The household broadband penetration is relatively good, 86%. Fiber, not doing that great. The UK government actually has billions of pounds in investment dedicated to ensuring that most of the country by 2030 is going to have access to 100 megabits per second to gigabit internet. Yet, when we look at what's going in the UK at the moment, the average median download speed is 61 megabits per second. So compared to Chile, UK is not doing that great. Again, dozens of cities, we look at dozens of cities and look at the speeds. And in here, you can very quickly see they are not symmetrical. So we're not talking about symmetrical downlink, uplink speed. We're talking about very, very slow uplink. Downlink is okay, but those three different dots that you see far to your right, these are actually alternative operators. So in the UK, thanks to a vast amount of funding that the government is getting, and thanks to actual private equity funds investing into those alternative fiber providers, we are seeing quite a lot of really fast symmetrical speeds networks being currently rolled out. And we also are seeing alternative wholesale networks, alternative to BT Openreach. So we're seeing hyperoptic and city fiber and so on doing very well in that regard. And because of the urban-rural divide and the government wanting and spending 1.2 billion into bridging that divide, we're also seeing emergence of smaller ISPs in rural areas. And those areas that commercially it would have been otherwise viable. And there are some interesting examples. So we have, and that could be a success story, we have Broadband for Rural North, whereby it's a community approach. So you go and roll out fiber together, and then you learn how to do it, and you go to another community. And you have Vonus networks that actually present the show, where the first roll out fixed wireless access, and then after they know there's demand and users know what to do with the internet, they go and roll out fiber. So success can be measured in different ways. One is actually to be present, and number two is for users to appreciate that the networks that you get are going to be used. But it's not about speeds. With UCLA, we have lots of partnerships with different organizations. So in here, I wanted to show you one of the examples of how we can help the communities to make sure that they're getting the access to the broadband funding. So within the US, there are billions of dollars available through funding through the American Rescue Plan. So one of the communities, Loudon, I think I'm pronouncing this properly, use UCLA data to actually determine the real level of adoption. Because according to FCC, almost everybody was covered. So saying there's no need, you don't need any help, you all covered, no point. What we actually found out, and you can see on the map right there, is that quite a large number of households, around 6%, didn't have access to network, and even those that they had, the network quality wasn't that great. So that compared to 0.2%, according to FCC, that actually had no network. So as a result of that, Loudoun County was awarded $17 million of funding to make sure that they can eliminate the broadband gap. Success? Yes. Another matter of looking at the urban-rural divide. So we have all been stuck at home during COVID. We couldn't commute. Whatever internet we had to use it. And what is extremely important is that whatever we experience in cities is very different to what you get in rural areas. So across the European Union and G20 countries, the fixed broadband download speed in rural areas is close to 50% slower than those in cities, and around 31% slower than the median average. So obviously, there are those areas underperforming. And what's really important is that we at WUCA work with governments and OECD at ways how we can bridge this really interesting inequality, so-called rural digital deserts, where you don't have any access to any networks, not to mention high speed, no networks at all. And this comes through data. You need to be able to have access to data to measure it, to see it in real time. And this is my last slide, and there's lots of going in there, but I just wanted to bring to your attention an example of how we can look at data not only through the lens of urban-rural divide, but just looking through a lens of divides that are within the cities. So on your left, there is a University of Chicago map whereby they're looking at how good is the internet, how good is the performance compared to some of the metrics from the census. So compared to your race, compared to what sort of education level you have, compared to where do you live, and so on. And there are some really interesting outcomes that came through that, and we're working to assess what can be done. And on the right-hand side, you can see a very sneak preview of something done that we're currently working on. And this is a map of Cork, areas around Cork, which is south of Ireland. And this is just one operator, Eircom, the incumbent operator. So what we're doing here, we're trying to assess how good is the network, is there any network? So all the areas that are in red and in yellow is where the speeds are below 100 megabits per second. So you can see like lots of blues in the city center. Further you go, the speeds get slower. And we're going to be able to build out this map to look at how does it differ if you overlay mobile and fixed. Are there areas where there's actually no coverage at all? And we're hoping to show this at MWC next year. So the importance of having right data and the importance of being able to analyze it and then take action is key. So my thinking in here and what I was trying to show is we very much focus on was the fiber rollout, was the fiber take-up. But there's also a question about the areas that have no network at all. And even in the areas that you have network, you might have fiber network, why is that some of those people are actually not subscribing to it? Is it because they don't see value in it? Is it because they don't know what fiber brings? And I think that's also another way we can educate the end customers and users of the importance of having faster mobile networks. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Sylvia. And we'll be very excited to see the conclusions of that study in Barcelona early in 2023. We come to the final part of today's agenda, and starting with a somewhat philosophical comment that there's no single way to measure success. In the telco space, different operators operate in different types of markets, are pressured or accelerated by different types of market dynamics, are striving for different things. Maybe it's about cost reduction, maybe it's about revenue growth. What we're going to examine in this fireside chat with Bjorn Capens from Nokia is, what are the kinds of strategies that operators should be putting in place to be successful today, but importantly to be successful in future? Bjorn, if you'd like to join us on stage, thank you.
Gladly.
So Bjorn, one of the things that we've looked at and talked about through the course of today's sessions here at the WBBA event is the surge in bandwidth demand on fixed networks is not slowing down even as we come out of the kind of the post-COVID period across most of the globe. What is it that operators need to do successfully in order to deliver on that demand? And then what are the kind of the future-looking strategies they need to have in place to deliver the demand of the future?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was watching the presentations of Peter and Sylvia. I was kind of crossing fingers that we wouldn't contradict.
Yeah.
But so far so good. I think, look, it's not all about speed. That's one of the messages I did see. But let's face it, the foundation is still the need for speed. Yeah. People taste speed, people need more speed. COVID changed the world, right? It made us realize that what we had been using in the past maybe 10 years, which is fundamentally either point-to-point 1 gig networks or GPON networks, are probably going to cut it for the next coming years. So what I think is the first thing that will happen is the transformation from those, what we call ultra broadband networks, to the next generation, to the next step. And XGS PON, 10 gig PON is going to be all over the place. So what I predict is going to happen is that the coming decade will be about all operators transforming their networks to that next step. That's number one. Secondly, the upstream capacity is proven to become far more important because people are sitting in their home offices. They need to upload files. They need to operate in their home office as if they were in any physical office on Earth. So again, the need for upstream is also extremely important, which is also why, for instance, a symmetric technology like XGS is going to have its right to play. Now, will there be a next step? For sure, after we've been bringing 10 gig to the wider population, for sure at some point. And by the way, I count 25 gig PON in there because it's the same complexity. So I look at it as the better 10 gig. But the moment you start to think about what's going to happen in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, the good thing is fiber technologies will continue to evolve. And already today at the show, you see us talk about 50 gig PON, 100 gig PON, or whatever is going to be the next step. So speed is the first thing I think operators need to invest in. But with good focus also on symmetric capability.
Okay, very good. And I think we've heard from a number of speakers today about the need to identify the services and application demands of the future and then invest in infrastructure which is future-proofed, which I think is that ongoing transformation we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Okay, very good. Fiber to the home broadband is another great opportunity, but again, requires significant investment. What is it that operators can do to help to make the business case for that investment? And is there anything that they can do to better their chances of a good ROI?
Yeah, I keep saying this anytime I'm getting a similar question. In the first place, it's about finding different use cases. We know fiber as, for instance, a fiber to the home residential technology, but I would really urge operators to think creatively. What is it we can do beyond pure connectivity? Yeah. Think of innovative gaming offerings to customers. If you're a gaming customer or if you're a gamer, you probably have a willingness to pay quite a bit to get a low latency connection that lets you be the fastest of the pack and shoot faster, right? Yeah. Or drive faster. Think also beyond residential. It's not only about connecting, let's say, the consumers. If you're going to lay out your fiber infrastructure, you're going to pass anyway past all these small, medium, even larger enterprises. So why not use the same infrastructure to connect commercial campuses, schools, hospitals, stadiums, anything that is in reach? Because that's automatically also going to give you a new, let's say, revenue potential that'll help reinforce your business case. And then the last thing, I've been discussing this with a couple of operators again at the show. If you think of the evolution of our mobile networks, and at one point in time 5G networks get further densified, it makes perfect sense to think of your fiber network initially made for residentials, ultimately also expanded to your enterprise segment. Mm-hmm. Why not use it at the same time for mobile transport? Because all of these factors are going to have a very positive influence on the total cost of ownership of your fiber network.
Okay, very good. And I think focusing on the user requirements, I think is a very important place to start making that business case. We think in terms of access, but the gamer at home does not think in those terms.
Absolutely, absolutely. And think about willingness to pay.
Willingness
very,
to pay.
very important.
Yeah.
Monetizing what you offer.
Absolutely. So, if we kind of, look into our crystal ball, the ultimate goal is providing, broadband for everyone. And Sylvia was able to point to, that dichotomy of, the unconnected versus the connected. How do you think that we are doing, as an industry in terms of providing ubiquitous broadband?
I think, look, first of all, let's not be too harsh on ourselves. If we look back to what happened in the past 10 years, in the history of mankind, those were 10 very important years, because we've been building fiber networks like never before. And you've seen also in the presentation of Sylvia that that did bring a lot of countries to a very high level of broadband, but even ultra broadband penetration.
Yep.
Still, in the same presentation, Sylvia was proving the point that we're not in the same situation in all places. So we definitely have a way to go, which is why I expect that in the coming decade, there's still going to be huge investments to further layout of those fiber infrastructures. Now, the good thing is this. If you solidify your business case, like I just explained, you probably will attract private money that is going to invest in fiber networks, because that's an asset that will be there for long. And secondly, to help those places where the fiber business case is not obvious, you also see government money or public money coming into play. So what I believe is that the build-out of fiber is going to have a prosperous future, in that there's both private and public money that's going to be injected, and that'll help to connect as many people as possible, which has always been the game in the fixed access environment. And maybe just to add one last thing, Sylvia mentioned the fixed wireless access as a kind of way to probe the interest of a market before you will lay out the fiber, but think also of it the other way around. If there is no business case for fiber that can ever be justified, fixed wireless might as well be the one complementing technology that still provides you a way to connect as many people as possible.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, just to maintain visibility across all the technology options in order to deliver the connectivity.
Absolutely, you should be agnostic, just look at how can I cater for the demand.
Absolutely. Earlier on in the session today, we had a couple of panel conversations and keynotes around the topic of driving sustainability in terms of operator strategies. This concept of sustainability by design, but also there was some conversations around being more ruthless as an industry in terms of the way that we seek to achieve our green agenda goals. What is your perspective on how well the industry is doing, successful or not, in terms of driving sustainability?
So again, a couple of aspects to me. First of all I've said about fiber networks being built out, beautiful, because there is no more efficient technology than passive optical technology to kind of reduce the power consumption per user, or per gigabit, I should say. That does mean that older technologies, whether we all like it or not, like copper, coax, over time they will, let's say, get substituted by something which intrinsically is more green.
Yep.
So that's step number one. You mentioned the use case that also Nokia brought to this forum, which is about reducing the consumption by technology. So we did indeed work on purpose-built chips. We're not the only one in the industry, I guess, but that helps to dramatically lower the power consumption per bit consumed. Also very important. And that's just one example. So we as a technology partner, it'll be our duty to find innovative ways to reduce that impact on the environment. But the last thing I'm going to say, it's not only about power. Although power is extremely important for the planet and our wallet, I would say, because both aspects play. Yeah. There's also recyclability. Yeah. And that is probably something where a lot of parts of the industry can still take a major step. So for instance, in Nokia, we've now decided to go for 100% recyclable packaging, which may sound very simple, but it is a mind shift. Yep. We are going to get away from plastics. We're going to go to 100% cardboard. We're going to also design products that can easily be dismantled, recycled to a large degree. I think there's still a lot of uncharted territory that we can explore as an industry, in my view.
I think that's right. I think that looking beyond power, I think, is a very important consideration. I mean, we heard earlier from Trevor Linney from Openreach. I think Openreach have the UK's second biggest vehicle fleet.
The car fleet, yeah. He tells me all the
time. So there's that, and to your point, it's about the industry ecosystem, the device manufacturers, the supply chain, the packaging. The whole industry needs to be moving in the same direction. Otherwise, those benefits really do struggle to kind of catch on.
Absolutely.
How important is it for this transformation towards fully autonomous networks? How important is it, and how well do you think the industry is tracking towards that?
Two different questions, right?
Yes, of course.
So why is it important? Well, look, I told you, we need to be technology agnostic.
Yeah.
So in the long run, 20 years ago, life was easy. Operators were all deploying central office-based ADSL. That was it. That was the whole broadband story.
Yep.
And then, of course, there was coax cable as a competing technology. We now see a very, very diverse landscape because people are using different fiber technologies. They bring fiber to whatever place in the network makes most economical sense. We think about fixed wireless access that complements that technology. So intrinsically already, the access network is getting more complicated. If on top of that you deal with multiple vendors, multiple generation of equipment, portfolio, you need something that helps you maintain that network in a much more simple fashion. Mm-hmm. Automation is going to give you that toolkit. Automation or software-defined access networks in general is going to exactly provide you the means to make your networks, programmable, self-maintainable. Okay, and I can list all the buzzwords, but that's exactly what the industry needs. Now, how are we doing today? To be honest, I've been talking to many operators again at this show, and it's clear. Everyone sees that this is the trend. This is the way to go. Are we all already at the level of starting to implement? Are we all as mature? No. I see a huge contrast still in the industry. And it's a bit chicken and egg. I keep getting the question, you prove me what's going to be the gain. And it's extremely difficult, because at the point in time, I would invite us as an industry to take the leap of faith and to just trust the fact that the trend towards further automation of network is simply going to help us. And is simply going to bring benefits that might not even be quantifiable today, but they'll definitely be there. That's what I feel about it.
Okay, so what we're saying is that there is agreement in principle from the operators,
yes,
but some hesitancy in taking that leap of faith as it stands right now.
And everyone is watching everybody. But if we keep watching everybody, nothing's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So we need proof points in the market to get it across the line.
Okay, and I feel like we've been here before as an industry.
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
And just a final question from me before we close. Is there enough attention in the industry given to improving user experience?
It starts to improve, I think, because if I look back to these kind of conferences and others, it was all about connectivity and the last mile and the network. And actually, we kind of had forgotten that the real bottleneck, if you start boosting your capacity in your network, is going to simply move to the home, right? And of course, operators, okay, it may not be their fault that Wi-Fi is not performing, but it very rapidly becomes their problem.
Yeah, of course.
So what I now start to see is more attention to it. So I see a lot of, let's say, interest in finding ways, how do I, let's say, develop my home network in a better way, such that the bottleneck which I had resolved in the last mile is not going to situate itself now in my home. So for an operator, great advantage, because not only are you going to become a trusted party that is going to create a sticky experience with your end customers, at the same time, you are almost literally expanding the control of your network beyond people's doorsteps. Because all of a sudden, what's happening in the home does become of interest to the operators in a positive way.
Yes.
And that is one aspect of user experience. And of course, beyond that, we need to really think about what are added value applications that users can also take benefit from. And then every operator needs to decide how to position themselves in the value chain. But again, as a concept, as a trend, we need to look at aspects like parental control. How can we get those kind of security features, let's say, closer to the user? So those two aspects, I would say, are, to me, important to explore.
And this goes back to your earlier point about thinking creatively beyond connectivity.
Absolutely, much more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Bjorn. I'm not sure if there are any questions from the audience. Otherwise, I'd like to thank Bjorn for joining us today for this fireside chat and for really rounding off the World Broadband Association annual event 2022. I'd just like to invite Martin Kriener, Director General, to come on stage to share some closing remarks, invite people to share a drink with us at the back of the workshop room on conclusion. But thanks again to Bjorn Capens from Nokia.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Bjorn. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Bjorn, there for wrapping that up. Quite frankly, I think Bjorn actually gave the wrap up of all the key points of the day as well. Of course, there's a lot of alignment. I mean, we learned today that there's a lot of agreement on a lot of the topics, an agreement for increased investment in broadband. I was particularly taken, say, with Sylvie's presentation at the end there, the data-based view from UCLA of actually what's happening. And if you look at the ambition of the WBBA, it is to get broadband connectivity for everyone, everywhere. And, that's a nice catchphrase, but that needs to be measured or it's not going to happen. So I'm particularly interested in how we actually baseline where we are today and then see where the improvements are, and also use that as part of the arguments to regulators, governments and so on, investors, for where the opportunities are based on the data and where the gaps are based on the social and economic need. I think it was very clear today the industry is awake to the need for sustainability and investment in sustainability. I think the previous decade of greenwashing is probably over, and we are now very much in the space of there's a planetary need for us to address this issue, and there's strong financial upsides and benefits and drivers for us addressing that issue. And I thought that was a really good discussion that we had today. It was great to see the case studies, and I think there are a lot of successful case studies out there, far more than we've already captured. And so I'd be really keen that we can continue to grow that library, because if it's a small library, it'll be of limited value to members. But as every additional case study that goes into that library, it exponentially increases the value of that library, particularly to the operators who are still trying to work out whether they should do something and why they should invest. I think there's also a consensus that I heard today on we've got more work to do in defining the supply side roadmap, but we really need to understand the demand side roadmap as well. We need to understand what people are going to want to use broadband for, why they're going to need it, and when they're going to need that. So I felt overall an excellent day. We lost a number of people due to the free beer outside over the last hour, and that's always a shame, but I'm Irish, so I can understand why they left for free beer as well. We are going to have a cocktail reception in here now, so I invite everyone to remain and enjoy a few drinks and a casual chat on some of these topics. So many thanks for your participation today. Many thanks to all the presenters. Thanks to Mark for being an excellent MC. And we will build on this as the years go by. So thank you, and we'll draw this to a close.